management, and decision making in the business. When you're faced with a challenge, what do you do? And how quickly do you adapt to the new way of doing things? How do you recognize the new way of doing things? How do you even keep yourself engaged to think of the future new way of doing things and actually creating the new way of doing things yourself? So that you're in charge of this whole conversation and the narrative, in charge of the game.
So what you're actually saying is that if you're talking about this on a national scale, then you're saying that what on earth did the people who at independence, Kenyans, who were taking over the reins from the colonialists and now had to run the government, what on earth were they thinking?
Yep.
How did they go about making decisions to ensure that this idea, this dream that they had of a nation was actually fulfilled?
First of all, even to ensure that they understand the dream from the same perspective, all of them. Are you all reading on page 17 of this book called Dreams of Kenya? Not Dreams of My Father, Dreams of Kenya? Are you all on the same page? And then how do you actualize this dream? And how do you keep looking back and agreeing that, yes, we are still on the right path, or we have derailed a bit and we need to come back on the right path?
And then what do you do when you realize this?
When you realize, how soon do you make that decision that, yeah, we actually made a mistake. Let's come back. We're going to speak to a man who has served in all these sectors, public sector, private sector, has been the helm of government, has also been at the helm of the corporate world. And this is Nicholas Nganga. For those that may not know, Nicholas Nganga is the immediate former chairman of Safaricom Limited, has served in that board for more than a decade. He was the chairman when Michael Joseph was CEO. He was chairman when the late Bob Collymore was CEO. He was chairman when Michael Joseph was interim acting CEO. He was chairman when we had a new CEO until last week. So he's seen this company grow. But before that, and what many people actually do not know about Nicholas Nganga is that he has served in other boards as well in the private sector. He also worked in government for many years, especially in the treasury and planning and such others. When Mwai Kibaki, at one point when Mwai Kibaki was Minister for Finance, the PS was a man called Nicholas Nganga. You remember that city?
I recall that vividly. But
when you went to visit him for us.
No, but of interest is that how is it that one actually got to that particular position? Because to get to the point of, because that's the pinnacle, by the time you're a permanent secretary in a ministry, you're the senior most civil servant in that particular ministry. You are the boss. So how does one get to the
there?
Point where they actually land? And before they get there, what on earth did they do? And how did they start?
Who did they know?
Well, there's always that little detail of who did they know. Or perhaps you should ask, what did they actually do to stand out?
To stand out.
Yes.
Nicholas Nganga, thank you very much for speaking to us. Good morning.
Good morning.
As you can tell, we have a lot of excitement in preparing to speak to you, because there are very many things that we hope that we are going to be able to learn from this conversation. So let's just start from what CT is asking. So by the time you are serving as a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, in the Ministry of Health, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, what is it that you have done to stand out and get to that point? Just take us through your journey in public service.
Well, I hope I can hear you a little bit better if you speak a bit louder. To start with, one doesn't just wake up and you find yourself a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Yep.
This is the result of a progression of service in lower levels of government. I started working for the government in 1962 as a district officer. I worked through various ministries, the Ministry of Land Settlement and Water Development, Ministry of Natural Resources, Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife. Ended up as a deputy secretary in the Ministry of Finance, and then progressed there to deputy permanent secretary, and then to permanent secretary. So, as I say, it's a progression. It's not something that you wake up and find yourself in.
Tell us about the time when you were in the Ministry of Natural Resources.
I was in the Ministry of Natural Resources for a very brief time, from 1963 to 1964 as an assistant secretary. It was a very interesting thing because I was particularly keen on matters relating to water development. And one of the things I remember most vividly, first, that there was very little attention being given to water as a major natural resource that required a combined and well-regulated framework of development. So there were different bits of it being done by different ministries, and I just saw that the opportunity there as a very young officer suggested that all those little bits and pieces could be put together and form a Ministry of Water Development. And I did that with the help of a couple of expatriate officers who were in other ministries and could see the same problem that we saw of a gap in structure.
You're saying you did this as a young officer. How young were you?
I would say at this time I would have been something like 25 years, 26 years.
Really? So you became a DO in your teens?
Sorry?
You became a DO at a very young age, actually.
Yes. We qualified from university in those days at around 23 years. So I became a DO at about 24 years.
I think that story is actually very interesting, that we're talking about a junior officer, a very young person in their mid-20s, who sits and comes up with an idea and thinks this is the best way that our country can progress. And you take it to your seniors, and your seniors sit down and they listen to you. I mean, this is something that very many young people nowadays, or even those who are working, older people in government nowadays, will express as frustration, ideas never being listened to.
Okay. Yes, it was a different type of time, and incidentally, that wasn't the only time I ever did that. I can tell you I did practically the same thing later in the Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife. But at that young age, we were a new bunch of officers from university thrown into the maelstrom of transition from a colonial administration to a local administration, and literally thrown in at the deep end. And you had to swim as fast as you could and learn as quickly as you could. The good thing, and this people must always remember, is that the colonial officers were able and were willing to actually listen to young African officers, much as maybe they resented the fact that we were taking their places. But they were quite willing. I had very, very good relations with all the colonial officers that I dealt with, and there were many. So it was a different time, and I agree it is a pity that young people are perhaps not being listened to as much as they would like to be. But there is also an approach question. If you want to be listened to, you got to approach things in the correct manner.
Expound on that. I mean, because that appears to be the crux of the matter.
there is a bit of a problem about perceptions today. There is a feeling that older people who are in positions like the ones I've held got there somehow by luck and good fortune, or they were favored. There is a terrible misconception today that you only get a position if somebody knows you or if somebody promotes your interests. Rather than showing your own merit. So if you approach this by with a jaundiced look, and you're trying to force your views and opinions on people, you will not get very far. I have one principle that I would like to tell young people, and it is, don't put in your CV something you cannot support in a live interview. Don't throw your weight around, because there may be a heavier weight than you around. So approach this with an element of humility and wanting to learn. And people will be willing to listen to you.
Do you think this was a principle that you used at that time? I mean, qualifying from university at the age of 23, and then becoming an officer in government, and then moving, well up the ranks. Do you think this is a principle that you applied that then gave you success?
One of the things that really I now look back and see is that everywhere I worked, quite apart from listening to those who knew better than I did, was I could perhaps identify what I call gaps. You know, in every organizational setup, however well structured and managed, you always find gaps. Today, people call them inefficiencies or something else. But if you can identify gaps as you go along and look for ways of filling them, and make other people accept that there is a gap either in knowledge or in approach or in structure, you get listened to very easily. And this was perhaps a very major part of what I did in the public service, particularly in the earlier age. So one should really look for opportunities, not just try to take over what somebody else is doing, because they may be doing it quite well, and you are not going to be able to replace them in a very short time. So look for what they are not doing.
Carve out your own niche.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, call it a niche, call it a gap, but play a role that seems to be additional to the values that organization stands for.
Would you say that you succeeded in your positions in government for the country?
Would I see?
Would you say that you succeeded in the positions that you worked in for government?
Yes, I would say I succeeded in the positions I held in government, and I think those that worked with me recognized my success. One thing that doesn't always come out is that in 1979, I was honored by the government and awarded the Order of the Burning Spear as an elder. If this is not recognition of success, I don't know what is.
Indeed, it is. I mean, it's a big one. And they say that this is among the highest that you get as somebody who's serving in public service, elder, and then you get to the chief.
Well, I haven't got
Let's just say
any
that somebody,
control of that.
somebody somewhere turned their back again and forgot that Nicholas Nganga really has moved
Well,
on
look,
from being an elder to a certain higher level. Of course, this is a recognition. No, I'm just campaigning for you, Nick. I'm just saying. I
you can
think,
look at it this way.
yeah,
I was awarded that in 1979 for service that I had done up to that time.
true.
You can also now see what service, well, maybe not directly in the civil service, but
To the
what other
country.
service I've done since 1979 in the public sphere. And I would like to say that I think there is a bit of contribution I've made in that period also.
Very modest of you to say a bit. You have served in the boards of various organizations. You are chairman of G4S Security, Khan General. You've served in Kakuzi. You've served in various other capacities in the public sphere, as you call it, since 1979. What is it that drives you? When they approach you and they tell you, Nick, we'd like you to serve in our board. We'd like you to help steer this organization. What makes you say yes? And are there some that you've actually turned down and said, just looking at the culture of this organization from what I see from outside, no?
Let me first suggest that what I have done has been basically by invitation from people that have seen what I've done elsewhere. I've had maybe one or two invitations that I did not accept.
Yeah.
But all the ones that I've done have been done because first, they are things I thought I would enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, because I thought there were things where I could contribute to some extent. And I think I have contributed.
Those that you say you enjoy doing, just looking at some of them, you have steered the safari rally in the country. You've steered the Kenya Golf Union. Okay, golf, I can see you enjoy golf. Explain safari rally and you enjoying.
I had an interest in motorsport very early. I enjoyed driving, although I have a little hiccup at the moment. I'm not able to drive at all, and it feels almost like prison because I love driving myself around.
Mm-hmm.
And so by 1968, I had joined the Kenya Rally Drivers Club. I had had a few tries at motorsport, a little bit of rough track racing.
Mm-hmm.
I had done a couple of rallies, local rallies, and I finally ended up entering the East African Safari Rally. Didn't get very far on the road, but it was a good effort with a driver. The late Peter Shiuka was my driver, I was co-driver, and we made an effort at that. So I was in motorsport. I enjoyed that, and through that I was then around 1985 invited to join the Automobile Association. I was soon made vice chairman of the Automobile Association, and I became the chairman of Safari Rally Limited. And I was chairman of Safari Rally Limited for 9 years.
Mr. Nganga,
overseeing nine safaris.
Mr. Nganga, the question I want to ask is, prior to you and Mr. Peter Shiuka, the late Mr. Peter Shiuka, actually entering the East African Safari Rally, had any other Africans attempted that particular feat?
Oh yes, yeah. There were many, in fact, more accomplished drivers. I wish I could remember their names now, but yes, there were others. Motugethoi and somebody else. Trying to remember their names, but there were others who had tried.
They had tried.
And Peter Shuka had tried once before with somebody else.
Now, as for the chairmanship of the Safari Rally Limited, had there been any African prior to your chairmanship?
No, there wasn't.
And how many Africans have we had since?
I honestly can't remember because there were mixes. There were some Africans, some people of other races. So it's been a mix. So can't remember them.
I want to take you back to your time in the Ministry of Tourism.
Yes.
And you mentioned that in the same way that you had purposed your activities in the Ministry of Natural Resources, you applied a similar diligence in this ministry. What are the things that you and your teams did in the Ministry of what was it called then? Tourism and what did we call it then? Tourism.
It was tourism and wildlife at that time.
Yes.
Yes. And the thing that I was referring to was the fact that as I was under secretary at that time, and we had great problems with wildlife sites because there were two organizations. There was what was called the Game Department that purportedly looked after wildlife that was not in the national parks. And there was a national park organization which was by statute semi-independent. And there were conflicts all the time between these two departments. And we couldn't get them to have a unified strategy for management of wildlife. So I sat down, looked at their laws, and picked out what was common, suggested that the two be combined into one Department of Wildlife Management. And I put up a paper. The minister agreed. He was actually very happy with it because he had experienced this problem. It was taken up and we formed a Department of Wildlife Management, what you might call the precursor of today's KWS.
So it was born somewhere on, on the mind of Nicholas Nganga, just looking at what's happening and thinking, you know what, we need a solution to this.
He saw a gap.
So seeing the gap constantly and thinking, you know what, instead of joining any of these sides
or doing what everybody else has been doing.
What everybody else has been doing is coming up with an idea and seeing that this idea helps to better manage wildlife in the country. Indeed, this is what we call trailblazing.
Well, it is, but tell me, is it, Mr. Nganga, is this the same sort of thinking that you would say that you carried with you into the corporate world?
Okay, yes, in a sense, but there are differences, of course, between the public sector and the corporate world. In the public sector, there isn't the sense of immediate, outright, and agency of competition. But in the same sphere, you can also see even in this sphere, you can also see the same concept of gaps, things that people are not doing. You step in and suggest that you could do things differently, but it is more difficult to do that in the public, in the private sector than in the public sector.
what we're having this morning is basically a profile interview, looking into the life and the works of Nicholas Nganga, who has served in public service. Says first started working for the country in 1962 as a district officer, rose through the ranks, through various ministries, up to the highest level of permanent secretary. Served as permanent secretary in ministries of foreign affairs, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Health. Also worked in various other capacities in the public sector, and then also moved into the private sector, where he has contributed immensely to very many things. Chairman of the Safari Rally Limited for 9 years and overseeing 9 safari rallies, participating in the East African Classic as a co-driver, getting into the boards of various private sector organizations, steering bodies, and until recently, he's still a member of very many boards and also chairing several boards. But until recently, he's also the chairman of Safaricom Limited, where he served for another 13 years at the helm of this particular board. This conversation with Nicholas Nganga continues. Any questions, any comments, Spice FM KE, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And then at some point, we'll open up the phone lines if you've got any question that you'd like to ask him directly. 0719 012600. Broadcasting on Spice FM and also worldwide, www.spicefm.co.ke. Spice FM KE on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, where we live stream audio visual. This morning's conversation is basically a profile interview. We are looking back at the life and times of Nicholas Nganga, who has served in public service, who served in the private sector as well. And we're titling this conversation this morning, Discipline, Fairness, and Integrity in Public and Private Service. I mean, and it's very important that we bring in those words, because just so far in the last 28 minutes that we have been speaking with Nick, you can pick out some things that, get into service, get into public service, and look for the opportunity. Ensure that you wake up every morning and you're saying, I'm going to make a difference.
Well, the fundamental difference is look for the opportunity to improve the service you're in. Not to improve your lot.
Not to improve your life.
Yes, which seems to be the mantra by which many people who are in public service right now seem to live by. Yes.
It's to look at the opportunity, not where you can steal.
No.
But look for opportunities where you can
make a difference.
Serving in a ministry and seeing, all right, so this is environment and natural resources, but we've got very many others. We've got water, we've got all, and come up with an idea. Let's consolidate all this and create a ministry that encompasses all this. And that idea, as a young person in the age of 25, you take to your bosses and your bosses look at it and say, yes, we can restructure the government based on the ideas of a brilliant young man. Another one is, just like he said, serving in another ministry and seeing there's a lot of conflict between various organizations. These guys are managing wildlife that's not in national parks. These ones are managing wildlife that's in national parks. Look, there's conflict. What's
and
the
it's
solution?
not necessary.
It's not necessary. Let's come up with one body that manages that. To date, we have the Kenya Wildlife Service, and then we go back and see, all right, this was what was happening then, and this is what somebody looked, and so a solution is required, and came up with a solution.
Saw the gap, and then sought to find a solution to ensure that that gap was filled.
Indeed. And Nicholas, just before we went to the break, CT had asked you the difference now between serving in the public sector and serving in the private sector. You had highlighted one of the main ones is that the public sector is not under the pressure to make more money.
Or to compete, really.
To compete. So how does this then translate in serving from that kind of organization to serving in the private sector, where it's all about the bottom line and shareholder value?
Okay, let me first clarify that most of my experience in the private sector has been at the level of chairman.
Yep.
In other words, it's a board role rather than an executive role. Although I had a little experience running a government corporation that was commercial. The difference really is that you have to make decisions much more quickly. You've got to study your ecosystem much better in the private sector, and to be a little more focused. In the public sector, you can actually look at a very wide range of things that impinge on your policy, because every policy of every ministry has some kind of relationship with every other aspect of government. But when you are in the private sector, you have a much more focused strategy. You have to deal with issues more rapidly and quickly. You've got to be more agile in decision making, and to understand your field very much better than perhaps everybody else. That's the only way you can become a leading corporate. If you understand your market better, you understand your people better, you understand the needs of your market, and you design your strategies and policies in a more focused way.
Looking at the advice, I mean, you talked about it, serving in an advisory capacity on boards in the corporate sector. And it obviously requires an element of wisdom in order to give advice or in order to lead a company in a certain way. Do you think that your experiences from the public service then influenced the role that you then now played in the corporate sector?
It does, to the extent that at the end of the day, what you're dealing with is people. Decision making is not about some something that you can't see.
Inanimate, yes.
It's basically about people. It's about how you can influence people's thinking and their tastes, their wishes, and their ambitions. And as long as you have learned to deal fairly with people and in a genuine manner, in an authentic manner, to meet needs, there is a commonality and a convergence of approaches between the public and the private sector. And as I said, the basic difference is that in the public sector, you are looking at a wider achievement. In the private sector, you are looking at both your top line and your bottom line, and looking at what facilitates you are achieving your objectives. But you must never forget that it's all about people. At the end of the day, it is how people view the service that you're providing or the product that you're providing that will make the difference.
You say that the capacity you have held in the boards that you've represented as chairman has been advisory. I thought that boards were supposed to direct policy.
I'm not quite sure that I use the word advisory myself.
Maybe it's my colleague who used the word advisory, and I have decided to pin that word on you.
I wouldn't see my role in a board, especially in the capacity of chairman, as being advisory. It's a leadership position. You're supposed to be like a compass. You are the one trying to get people to think with a common objective. People have various different approaches.
Yeah.
You are expected to put all these people's thoughts together, see what is the most advantageous and commonly accepted strategy, and you ride with that. You can't just sit there and be advising. What would you be advising about?
The corporate or the private sector is reputed to be not just competitive but cutthroat. How does one survive for the years that you've survived in a company that is started as one of the best on this continent for this long?
There are two aspects to that question, and they are rather different. How I have survived is one thing, is different from how Safaricom has survived. Safaricom has grown largely because of a very early recognition of the role that people can play, because communication is, after all, about people, and Safaricom started as a telecommunication company. And as we went along, we found, again, you might say it is gaps, like I said earlier, areas which were ignored and not very well catered for. We were helped enormously by development of technology, the availability of not only technological platforms, but also the devices improved and became much cheaper, and so on and so forth. So as we went along, we were looking at what is it the people want, and what is it that they are not getting. What is it that you can do with this little gadget that has access to a platform that connects it to other, and so on and so forth. So this is how products like M-Pesa came up. Is there something that we can do to assist people who are not getting this kind of service? And of course, once you establish your ability or capacity in an area like that, then you tend to grow and grow fast. Don't ask me why others didn't do it at the same rate, because I don't know. I really think that one would have expected them to. But that is Safaricom growing on basically appreciating the needs of the people, what people want, and trying to provide that. As for my own stay at Safaricom, it's got to do a lot with what I might call my style of leadership, which, as I said earlier, is I try to be as authentic as I can be. I try to be very fair. I listen to people. By the way, that to me is a critical, fundamental thing, that if you are a leader, you are not the holder of wisdom. You are there to, yes, you use your own capability and wisdom to tap the wisdom of other people. You listen to other people. Nobody's idea is unimportant.
But as you do that, Chairman, and you're sitting there and people maybe are presenting very divergent opinions which they hold very dear, and they're arguing and they're willing to die for those opinions, how do you make the decision on what direction to take?
You continue to get their thinking together. You glean from what they are saying what is of common interests. At the end of the day, when people, if you manage people's thinking and contribution talking well enough, you're going to find that people are trying, if they are genuine, People are trying to get to the same objective, but it's their ways of approaching that are different. So you keep on trying to bring them back to the objective and asking, how do you think of the other person's idea? What's wrong with it? And eventually, if you've got the capacity or the capability to listen and draw people's thinking closer together. In other words, I hate using the word compromise, because compromise has a tendency to imply that you are sacrificing objectives.
You're ceding, you're losing something.
Collectivity of ideas. And you bring people together that way, and eventually you arrive at perhaps, in fact, the best solution, because it has got inputs from many kinds of wisdom.
Indeed, the success and failure of many organizations has often been pinned on the board. And if we look at very many organizations in the country, both in the public and private sector, parastatals and listed companies and non-listed companies, when things start going wrong, people still head back and question the board and the decisions that the boards were making. From your experience, I mean, you're a Kenyan, you have served in various capacities, in various boards, you have also seen and witnessed for yourself companies taking the wrong turns. What is it that affects that leadership at the board level that says a company just going downwards, spiraling downwards?
Well, that's a very broad question, because no company goes down the same way as the other, although there may be common factors that influence this. But one of the things that I personally think is causing problems now is the inability to look at a common goal, and a great deal of intrusion of personal interest, lack of the values of governance around conflict of interest, intrusion of external factors like you may say political factors and that kind of intrusion. All those things, if allowed to come into the deliberations of a board, will lead to lack of clear foresight and clear strategy. And what we will have then is basically infighting, sometimes overt, sometimes covert, that removes from the board the ability to lead, to give direction.
Of course, at Safaricom, Nicholas, that must have tried to enter into the board or into the leadership of the organization. For Safaricom, such a big organization making so much money, those were constant threats. How did you keep them out of the door?
By having first a very, very strong board, a board that was very clear about its role and what it was required to do, which is to lead the company. A board that understood, had actually all the competencies. When you talk about technology, finance, legal, all the competencies were available in the board, and above all, a protective board, a board that protected the management. Talking about management, Safaricom has perhaps the strongest professional team, technological team. In this country, it's a very, very strong team. With very good leadership. So when everybody is working together and in unison, and you have, to the extent possible, complied with all governance requirements,
Yeah.
then you're in a position to tell people, please leave me alone or let me get on with things because your intrusion is only going to interfere with this. Let me add here a couple of things. The regulatory frame in any business is very important, and you have to understand fully the regulatory framework in which you are working or you are trying to manage your business and manage that properly. Have people who understand every bit of law that affects you and make sure that you are complying with them and that these people are also capable of explaining to whoever raises any question why they think or they feel that they are compliant. So as long as you are compliant, you are clear and you are observing the rules of good governance, and you have you are observing your integrity and ethical issues, then you are in a position, in a very strong position to say, we don't think that your intrusion into this is going to be toward value.
Nicholas, you've been very busy for the last, many years. So what's going to be occupying your time now, and what are the things that then you will be doing or that you're interested in now that will take up your time?
Yes, as you say, I've been busy because Safaricom is not the only thing I've been doing. There are other things that I do. Companies where, as was said earlier, I am either on the board or I lead as chairman. Then I've got my own family and business affairs to look after. I'm not a wealthy person, so I don't have a huge portfolio of companies to
Perhaps,
bother about.
if you'll allow me to ask you a specific question. What interests you in terms of business? Something that occupies your mind and even your heart, personally.
What occupies me?
What occupies your mind and heart personally in terms of business?
I think my highest values are, first, obviously, family. I care a lot about my family. I care very much about the right things, people doing the right things. I learned from a very good educator when I was from primary school to 7 years in the same school, and the mantra was do the right thing because it's the right thing, not because of laws or rules or punishments, but do the right thing because it's right. Don't try to pad it with things, with other things. If it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong.
And that's it.
So that is a fundamental driving part of my life.
Which brings us to that question, because the issue of integrity is crucial, especially when we're talking about our country and where we are at right now. Some of the questions that are coming in are, have you ever been bribed? Have you taken a bribe? And how have you, in the cases where assuming that you've rebuffed a bribe, how do you rebuff a bribe?
I have been offered bribes directly at least 3 times. People who said, if you get me a contract to supply this and that to that ministry, we'll put you on our boat. I said, well, fine, thank you very much. I don't want to be on your boat. I've been told by a friend actually, but now unfortunately deceased, came to me. There was a project, and he says, I've been given this sort of float to make sure that the project succeeds, and I'm told you are the only one objecting and wanting to see a feasibility study. Is there a way we can get you to give up this idea of a feasibility study? I said, no. Keep your float. What I want is a feasibility study, and I'm going to insist on it. So these things have happened to me, and I've said I can't live without that kind of thing. So, yeah, I've never accepted a bribe in life.
We want to thank you very much, Nicholas, for speaking to us. Nicholas Nganga is immediate former chairman of Safaricom PLC. He still serves in various other capacities, in various boards of various organizations. He has served in the public service for many years. What would you like to tell people who are listening to you this morning? I mean, on the issues that you've said, integrity, on good leadership, on serving your country in whatever capacity.
I think all I would like to say is it's sad that people think that anything and everything is negotiable. They think that you have to offer inducement and so on and so forth. I believe the country can be managed and run without this level of inauthentic behavior. And I would just appeal to my country people, my countrymen and women, to try and see the bigger picture. The bigger picture is this country and its future, and the future of our children. Resources are not going to be exhausted. Money is not going to be exhausted. It will always be there. Don't try and grab hold of it like it's going to come to an end.
Expiring.
Land will always be there. You don't try and grab it like it's going to go somewhere. So these things are available for us all to share. And if we have the spirit of sharing the common good, knowing that as a person, as an individual, you cannot really survive entirely on your own just because either you have got a lot of money or a lot of land.
Yeah.
If you can see the common good rather than the selfish interests, then you will be a good citizen and the country will be a good country to live in.
Asante sana. Thank you very much, Nicholas, for speaking to us, and we wish you all the best in the
Thank
years to come. Asante sana for speaking
Thank
to us.
you so much.
Thank you.